always. All right. So without further ado, my name is Damon Fordham. I'm the author of 4 books on local African American history, as well as an adjunct professor of history at the Citadel in Charleston. Been pretty much to a lot of places. I've spoken in Canada. Did some things for BBC Radio 4 that was broadcast in England, the Voice of America in Russia, as well as lecturing at the University of Gambia in West Africa, among other places. So what I'm going to do here is sort of fill you in on some things that may not have been covered this morning, as well as give you a broader picture of what happened during this period. So without further ado, that is, "O freedom over me, and before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave." And by the way, you can record this if you want. I'm good with that, all right? And I played that because not too long ago, y'all were at the Harriet Tubman Bridge. And they sang songs like that as they were crossing into freedom, because I'm sure they told you the story about how they freed over 700 of our enslaved ancestors in that area where the bridge is now. And so this goes to show you how all of this sort of ties in together with some of the folk culture of this region. So let me take it back a little bit. In Senegal, West Africa, in the city of Dakar, there is a place called the West African Cultural Center. And a fellow there, one of the wisest men I ever met, was named Dr. Ousmane Sene. And he told us something very interesting. Now, those of you who are from the West Indies, who from the West Indies has heard of Anansi? Very good, very good, very good. Well, he was telling us that in Senegal, among the Wolof people, of which I'm somewhat descended from, he talked about how in Senegal they told the stories to their children about Luk, who was a rabbit, and Buki, who was a hyena, and how Luk the rabbit would always outwit Buki the hyena, to show that while a rabbit could not beat a larger animal like a hyena with his brawn, he could use so with his brain. And so those stories were transferred here to in the West Indies as the Anansi stories. But here in America, they were known as the Brer Rabbit stories. And I'm going to give you examples of how that played out. Here in St. Helena's Island, back in 1919, right here, as a matter of fact, right here on this island, there was a white lady named Elsie Clews Parsons, who wrote a book called Folk Tales of the South Carolina Sea Islands. And one of the stories, she interviewed a lady named Maria Middleton, who was 63 years old and born in slavery. And she told this story. She talked about the time that Brer Rabbit, Brer being short for brother, was acting so ridiculous and stealing the other animals' food and causing all this mischief that the animals got together and they decided that they were going to hang him out on a nearby post. So they took the rabbit and put him in jail and said they was going to hang him the next morning. So late that night, he got a visit from his friend, Brother Crane. And Brother Crane said, "Man, Brer Rabbit, I sure feel sorry for you. You're in a bad way." He said, "Yeah, I know, man. They're going to hang me tomorrow." And he said, "Wait a minute. I got an idea to save you, Brer Rabbit. How's that?" Called the rabbit over, whispered in his ear. And he's like, "Aha." So the next morning, all the animals came out. And they started chanting, "Hang Brer Rabbit! Hang Brer Rabbit! Hang Brer Rabbit!" And they led the rabbit up to the scaffold where they're going to put the rope around his neck. When all of a sudden, a voice came from above, "Turn that rabbit loose. He ain't done nothing." I was like, what? And he said, You heard me. Turn that rabbit loose. He ain't done nothing. And everybody and all the animals start running after that. Ah! They're scared, right? So the next thing you know, the crane flew down from behind one of the clouds, and went over to Brer Rabbit, untied him loose, and the rabbit looked at the crane and said, "Good job, Brother Crane." What's the point of that story? What was the point of that?
I'm trying to make it out to be something because you had said the person came and told the Brer Rabbit something in his ear, and then you said when they got there, somebody from the back just said, "Don't."
From the cloud, right? It was the same crane who told him that I'm going to save your life. So the crane, when they were about to hang the rabbit, he flew up behind the clouds and yelled like he was the voice of God, saying, "Turn him loose." And so the other animals got scared, and so he untied Brer Rabbit to save his life. So what's the point of that?
I still lost.
Simple. Okay, I'll explain. No worries. No worries. It's all right. I'll explain it to you. You see, the point of it was that there was no way he could physically get himself out of that situation. So what did he have to use? His mind. And the point of the matter was that the best weapon that you could have is in your head and not in your hands. Now, I want you to consider a couple things about this story. This was during a time of lynching. And so naturally, the people wanted to have some sort of hope during periods like that. So this Maria Middleton lady could not read or write. She was born in slavery. But as I'm going to show in my upcoming book on Black folklore, even though these people couldn't read or write, their genius helped them make up these songs. And their genius helped them make up these stories that they used for instruction. And this was a tradition that went way back from Africa all the way to over here to show you that even though a people may not have the opportunity to be educated in school, they can still have enough sense enough to create these amazing works of art like this that still do teaching, which also goes to show that you can learn from anybody, whether they went to school or not. And this is one of the things that shows the genius of this region along with those stories. Now, to get to Reconstruction. Now, the lady told you all about how they had the Port Royal experiment here, right? How they took these people fresh out of slavery and they had them being independent and everything, right? Well, here's the fullest story about Reconstruction. Reconstruction, after what she described, was the period from 1865 to 1877, when after the fall of slavery and after the Confederates were defeated, the federal government tried to reform and clean up the South from what it was doing. So what did? They passed 3 constitutional amendments. The 13th Amendment in 1865 that ended slavery throughout the country. The 14th Amendment in 1868 said that all men born here were citizens. The 15th Amendment in 1870 that said that all men born here had the right to vote. Women would get that in 1920 with the 19th Amendment. So that led to a lot of things that people don't know about. In Louisiana, they had the first African-American governor. His name was Pinckney Benton Stewart Pinchback. And he was called in to serve the term after they impeached a corrupt white governor named James Warmoth. And Pinckney Benton Stewart Pinchback did so well that in 1873, when he served out that term, he decided to run for the U.S. Senate from Louisiana. But the U.S. Senate would not seat him. Gee, I wonder why. So here's what he did. He tried to get the Democrats to support him. Didn't help. Tried to get the Republicans to support him. Didn't help. So according to the Congressional Record of the United States, 1873, pages 342 to 343, Pinckney Benton Stewart Pinchback got up on the Senate floor and said these words: "I am a man, and I am an American citizen, but from this day forward, I shall not follow the dictates of the Democratic Party, and I shall not follow the dictates of the Republican Party. I shall only follow the dictates of my heart and of my conscience. Pretty good words to live by. But he didn't let that stop him. Before he died in 1921, he helped start Southern University down in Baton Rouge, one of the largest black colleges in America.
Yes, sir.
That's right. So, here in South Carolina, from 1870 to 1877, there were 2 black lieutenant governors. Alonzo Jacob Ramsey served from 1870 to 1872. Richard Howard Gleaves served from 1872 to 1877. Richard Howard Gleaves served under Lieutenant Governor Lieutenant Governor Franklin Jacob Moses, the first time in American history that a state was run by a black lieutenant governor and a Jewish governor. University of South Carolina, down the street from y'all, from 1873 to 1877, the first and only desegregated school anywhere in the South. Behind Benedict College, they used to have Saxon Homes. That was named after Celia Dial Saxton, the first black woman to graduate from the University of South Carolina in the 1870s. And she died in 1935 while grading papers at her desk while she was teaching. That's right. There you go. And now they have Celia Dial Saxton Hall over down by the University of South Carolina. This was at the same time that Bathsheba Benedict was over at where you guys go to school now, starting Benedict College. That's right. So, that's right. There you go. You know it. Very good. So then in 1868, and she touched on a little bit, but I'm going to get into the whole thing. 76 blacks and 48 whites gathered at the courthouse in Charleston, South Carolina, to rewrite the Constitution of South Carolina into the most revolutionary document in American history up to that time. They named it the Declaration of Rights, and they called for such things as all laws pertaining to racial discrimination would be stricken from the books. Women would be allowed to divorce abusive husbands. There would be state hospitals and mental institutions. No one would go to jail for debt. And it was on January 23rd, 1868, that the great Robert Smalls from this area got up in that building and declared these words: resolved, all children in South Carolina between the ages of 7 and 14 must attend public schools at least 6 months a year under penalty of noncompliance. That, gentlemen, was the first public school law ever passed this far south of the Mason-Dixon line. Now, when I tell people these things, they often ask me, and this is why, if you notice, I always cite wherever I got this stuff from, so y'all know I'm not making this up. What I just told you just now comes from the minutes of the 1868 Constitutional Convention, which you can find on internetarchive.org, okay? Archive.org. But whenever I talk about these things, people ask me 2 questions. Number 1, why haven't I heard any of this before? And number 2, well, what the heck happened? I'm going to explain them both. Throughout the history of the Deep South, the wealthy class of whites' deepest fear was that the poor whites, in their poverty, in their illiteracy, and their subjugation, would find common cause with their black brethren and come together and overthrow the rule of the wealthy class of whites who were running the South in revolution. So, to prevent that from happening, the wealthy whites taught the poor whites that if black people had equality with them, the poor whites would be forced to the bottom of society. In simple terms, gentlemen, divide and conquer of the poor so that the rich could stay rich. And that's what racism is all about. So, December 24th, 1865, 6 Confederate veterans gathered at the courthouse in Pulaski, Tennessee, to form the Resistance Army against Reconstruction. They named themselves after the Greek word for circle, which is kuklos, and the Scottish word for family, which is clan. That's how the Ku Klux Klan started. So for the next 12 years, the Southland bathed in blood. There was Memphis Massacre of 1866, New Orleans Massacre of 1866, Meridian, Mississippi Massacre of 1871, Colfax, Louisiana Massacre of 1875, Clinton, Mississippi Massacre of 1876, Ellington, South Carolina Massacre of 1876, Hamburg, South Carolina Massacre of 1876, and November the 8th, 1876, according to the Charleston News and Courier, November 9th, 1876, blacks and whites shot it out in the middle of the street. And the federal government said, yo, we can't have this. This is going too far here. We got to put a stop to this. And so they passed the Tilden Hayes Compromise that they were telling you about that put the end to Reconstruction. But it did not stop entirely there. In 1895, right after all this happened, there was a lady by the name of Mildred Rutherford who had an organization called the United Daughters of the Confederacy. And they went throughout the South, as well as the country, taking things like what I just told y'all out of the schools and replacing it with pro-Confederate history. And that's why most people, don't know about this. Because out of sight, out of mind for most people, right? So, in 1890, the governor of Mississippi, James K. Vardaman, called the Mississippi legislature together to throw out their progressive Reconstruction Constitution and replace it with the segregation Constitution. Benjamin Tillman, who she was telling you about, did that here in South Carolina at the State House on September 10th, 1895. But here was the difference. The great 6 brave black leaders, the great Robert Smalls, William J. Whipper, a black lawyer here in Beaufort, James Wigg and Isaiah Reed, 2 black lawyers from Beaufort, Thomas Miller, the founder of South Carolina State University, and Robert Anderson, a black teacher from Georgetown. These brave black men risked their lives to go to the State House and argue eloquently against this segregation Constitution. And that's in my current book, the 1895 Segregation Fight in South Carolina. They lost 116-7, but that loss planted the seeds for the civil rights movement that was to come to undo those laws. So in the short run, gentlemen, they lost the battle, but in the long run, they won the war. And this is all so important because, you see, you can lose right now, but win eventually in the future. You always got to keep that in mind. And another reason that this is important is that the Spanish philosopher Jorge Santayana said in 1905, those who don't remember the past are condemned to repeat it. So when you see things like this stop happening again, it's your duty as young people to use your articulation, use your intelligence to stand up and speak out so it doesn't happen again. And knowing that people like that fought for it to get better in the first place should inspire you to take that information and move forward. Thank you. So with all that